President Trump pushes tax reform he insists will help the middle class. He raises eyebrows after what he says about his HHS secretary and insists if it doesn't change, the NFL is, quote, going to hell. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump says he will make taxes simple, easy, and fair for all Americans. He's pushing his new tax reform plan, which is now the top priority for his administration, even though he's not giving up on Obamacare repeal yet. As with any big piece of legislation, the devil is in the details. I'll speak with the White House Legislative Affairs Director about some of those details shortly. But tonight, after some big losses, the Trump administration and the president sound optimistic about tax reform. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brad, good evening to you. For all of the attention that's been focused on the repeal and replacement of Obamacare, tax reform is the issue the president must get past if he hopes to create any kind of legislative legacy. In Indiana today, where Democratic Senator Joe Donnelly faces a tight race for re-election next year, President Trump laid out his plan for tax reform.
This is the right tax cut, and this is the right time. Democrats and Republicans in Congress should come together, finally, to deliver this giant win for the American people.
While many of the details have yet to be filled in, President Trump is proposing 3 tax rates for individuals, 12, 25, and 35%. He would double the standard deduction to $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for a married couple. The corporate rate would be slashed from 35 to 20%, which President Trump, who has repeatedly said he doesn't set red lines, today insisted is a red line.
Very much a red line. In fact, I wanted to start at 15 so that we got 20. It just, the numbers were, 15 was so low we didn't take in the revenue. But I wanted 15 so we got 20. 20 is my number, so I'm not negotiating that number. I am not going to negotiate.
President Trump would also reduce the tax rate for small businesses, so-called S-corps or pass-through companies, to 25%, and increase the child tax credit from its current level of $1,000 per child, though he's leaving it to Congress to determine the exact amount. The plan eliminates most itemized deductions, but keeps the mortgage and charitable deduction. The president would also eliminate the marriage penalty, the death tax, and the alternative minimum tax. But from Capitol Hill, a warning. Utah Senator Orrin Hatch forecasting a difficult time getting tax reform through.
It's going to be tough to do. We're so equally divided that it's going to be almost impossible to do without some Democrat help, and I'm hopeful that we can do that.
As an enticement, President Trump today threatened Senator Joe Donnelly and other vulnerable Democrats.
If Senator Donnelly doesn't approve it, because, you know, he's on the other side, we will come here, we will campaign against him like you wouldn't believe.
President Trump also revealed today he has yet another backup plan for the repeal and replacement of Obamacare, insisting he has the Republican votes to do it, just not at the moment.
We have the votes for health care. We have one senator that's in the hospital. He can't vote because he's in the hospital. He can't vote because he's in the hospital. We have 2 other votes that are coming, and we will have them.
The president was referring to Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran, who had been in the hospital but is now home recuperating. President Trump says he can't cobble together enough votes by the reconciliation deadline of this Friday, but that he will try again in the new year.
We're going to do it in January or February because, as you know, we have the votes, but we can't go longer than Friday.
The president also revealed he will likely sign an executive order next week to allow insurance companies to sell health care policies across state lines. That would fulfill a major campaign promise and something Republicans have pledged for years. But the president's health secretary may never see the changes implemented. Tom Price is on thin ice after it was revealed he spent more than $400,000 on private planes. President Trump today said he is not happy about it, and he'll let Price know it. As for Price's job,
I am going to see, I'm looking at that very closely. I am not happy with it. I will tell you, I am not happy with it.
So you're firing? Would you fire him, sir?
Will you fire him? We'll see. The president definitely had that look. We did some digging to figure out how indeed President Trump has the votes to pass the Graham-Cassidy Act, since at least 3 senators, Collins, McCain, and Paul, have all said their definite no's. We have learned that the White House is working on some executive and regulatory actions they believe could bring on board Senator Paul. The bottom line right now, though, is, Brett, the president does not presently have the votes, but he hopes to have them by the new year.
Don Roberts, live in the North Lawn. John, thanks. So what are the prospects for tax reform after the failure of Obamacare repeal and replace, or at least so far that failure? Here to talk about that, White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short. Mark, thanks for being here.
Brett, thanks for having me on.
Let me start off where John left off, and that is the president's kind of hopeful pitch about bringing back this repeal, Graham-Cassidy bill. Do you really think you have the votes?
I think we'll get the votes, Brett. I think the reality is the American people have spoken many times on this. They spoke in 2010 when they elected a new House to say, we want you to repeal Obamacare. In 2014, they switched power, gave us 9 new Republican senators. We expect you to repeal Obamacare. It was part of the 2016 campaign. It is a promise Republicans have made to voters, and voters are not going to give up. Obamacare is only getting worse. Insurers are fleeing markets, rates are continuing to spiral, and Brett, next year, a brand new tax on every plan. Every American family is to pay another $500 in taxes on Obamacare. It's only going to get worse, and the cry of the American people will finally be heard by Congress, and they will finally repeal Obamacare, and we're looking forward to getting it done.
He said that the reconciliation will pop back in. As you know, you have to put it in. Budget resolutions, is the plan to do that?
So next year there'll be another budget, and at that point we would look for reconciliation instructions to allow us to work on health care. Yes, exactly.
Let's turn to tax reform. You sound optimistic, but as we know, this thing gets churned in the sausage grinder that is the Capitol Hill process. Do you think that this framework is going to hold?
We are confident in this framework. We think it's one that will work. We think it's what's best for the American economy. It's best for the American family, providing them with significant tax relief, but also keeping jobs here in America, which is something that the last administration suffered through. America has suffered. The last administration had a 1.8% GDP over its 10 years. That's the worst growth rate of any president since the Great Depression and Herbert Hoover. We need to get this economy growing again, and Congress knows that, the American people know that, and we need tax relief.
Now, you have the Freedom Caucus in the House already signing on as a block to this, but there are some up there on Capitol Hill who are concerned about how you're going to pay for this. What is going to happen? Is it going to be deficit neutral? Will you increase the deficit or the national debt, which now stands at $20 trillion?
Well, let's tackle that in 2 ways. One is that the president is committed to cleaning up the tax code. It is far too complicated, and by simplifying the tax code, you're going to get rid of many of the deductions, which is our way of paying for it. Many of the wealthy who have the best tax advisors are ones taking advantage of those deductions, and by cleaning it up, we're going to raise revenue. But it's also interesting to hear so many people now lecture on the deficit neutrality when over the last 8 years of the Obama presidency, we added $10 trillion to our debt. In the previous 230 years of our country, we had $10 trillion in debt. So now over the last 8 years, we've doubled our national debt, and those same Democrats are now going to lecture and say, hey, it's got to make sure it's deficit neutral. So we believe it's important to actually get the economy growing again, even if that incurs some initial deficit. We think the growth will add much more revenue over the long term.
In order to do that, you have to use what's called dynamic scoring,
Correct.
Which is, explain that to folks. It's essentially calculating what the growth is going to do for businesses and everything around the individual.
Exactly. If you go back to the Kennedy tax cuts, the Reagan tax cuts, there was very significant growth that occurred. It wouldn't have been captured in a normal scoring because there's an estimation of what growth happens because of the renewed investment, because businesses and individuals have more income to actually invest. And so dynamic scoring takes that into account.
And can you do that by the rules of the reconciliation?
We will be able to, what's happened already, Brett, instead of the dynamic scoring, is that Senator Corker, Senator Toomey struck a deal to allow $1.5 trillion in this tax relief in the budget. So that gives us the window to have the room and capacity to do our tax relief.
But you have to pass the budget in order to get there.
Exactly right.
Which is coming up first.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to break down Senator Schumer's criticism of a couple specific things and have you react to it. First of all, here he is on the corporate tax cut proposed.
They're plush with money already. There's no proof, no real belief, no real argument that they're going to take this new money and put it into creating jobs.
Talking there about companies, obviously.
Right. Well, I know that Senator Schumer probably assumes that central planners have a better way of reinvesting Americans' dollars. We think by allowing Americans to own those dollars, they can do a better job of creating jobs. And the reality is that too many jobs have fled America's shores. They've gone overseas because our corporate tax structure is no longer competitive with other countries around the globe. So what we're looking to do is to bring those jobs back. And by reducing the corporate rate, I think you'll see far fewer inversions, and you'll in fact see many of those companies coming back to America to create jobs.
And the pass-through number goes down significantly. The individual tax for a business that has to file taxes that way.
That's exactly right. That is significantly reduced as well, down to 25%.
Okay, here is Senator Schumer on the estate tax being cut.
The estate tax is so skewed to the very wealthiest among us, and they're going to repeal it. This is not going to fly with the American people, let me tell you.
Is it going to fly?
Well, I think that many of those who benefit from the provisions that he's talking about live in his state, and what they have is they have very wealthy accountants and tax lawyers who help make sure none of them pay estate taxes. The people most impacted by the death tax today are farmers across the middle of America whose farms have been owned for generations in their family, who are hurt by it when their property is taken away from them. That's who we're trying to protect, is the farmers across middle America.
Last one, he says this is going to result in you touching entitlements in some way, shape, or form.
Americans beware. That's what they do. Dramatically lower taxes on the wealthy, do it in an irresponsible way, and then they say the big deficit we just created forces us to cut Medicare and Social Security.
Is that the plan?
Well, as I mentioned, it's kind of ironic to hear them lecture us about deficits when they just added $10 trillion to our national deficit during the Obama years. But no, we're not looking to touch entitlements with this plan.
Mark, we appreciate your time.
Brett, thanks for having me on.
All right. President Trump is already backing the Republican nominee for Senate in Alabama. His original pick, incumbent Luther Strange, lost badly in yesterday's runoff. The victory by Judge Roy Moore was fueled primarily by Trump supporters. Correspondent Jonathan Serry has that story tonight from Montgomery.
We are one nation under God, and we can become one nation unified.
Roy Moore beat Alabama Senator Luther Strange by a margin of nearly 10 points in Tuesday's runoff election. His victory comes despite the president's support for Strange during the primary.
Don't let anybody in the press think that because he supported my opponent that I do not support him and support his agenda.
President Trump says he'll now support Moore in the December 12 general election as he faces Democrat Doug Jones. Mr. Trump deleted his tweets of support for Luther Strange and this morning wrote, "Spoke to Roy Moore of Alabama last night for the first time. Sounds like a really great guy who ran a fantastic race. He will help to make America great again."
The political seas, the political winds in this country right now are very hard to navigate.
In his concession speech, Senator Strange thanked the president for his support during the primary.
And if this causes him any trouble, it's not his fault. The fault always lies in the candidate or the head coach or the guy who's holding the ball, and that's my responsibility.
Moore, who displayed a revolver during a campaign speech and rode to the polls on horseback, is favored to win the general election in this solidly red state, but the campaign may be far from over.
You can never take any election for granted. Ask Hillary Clinton. So I think inevitably the Republicans will spend a lot of money and time to make absolutely certain their base votes.
Former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who supported Moore in the primary, says he plans to help similar insurgents around the country, but it's conviction, not cash, that drives the populist base. Bannon says his efforts are intended to support, not hurt, the president's agenda.
I told you all last night that a vote for Judge Roy Moore is a vote for Donald J. Trump.
But with such a slim majority in the Senate, populist attacks on the Republican establishment, including Mitch McConnell, may cause trouble for the majority leader as he attempts to unify Republicans on health care, tax reform, and other legislation. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. The Taliban overseas fired dozens of rockets today at the Kabul airport where U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis had landed earlier in the day. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live tonight at the Pentagon. Tell us what happened there. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. An official tells us militants fired 40 to 45 rockets and rocket-propelled grenades at the Kabul International Airport. The attack lasted 5 hours and began less than 2 hours after Defense Secretary Mattis's plane touched down. Mattis was not at the airport when the attack began. A video released on an ISIS website shows a militant firing a Russian-made 73mm recoilless gun at the airport. U.S. officials tell me shrapnel rained down around the airport. The use of rocket-propelled grenades and now the U.S. military says suicide vests means the insurgents were able to get close to the airport perimeter. No U.S. troops were injured. At least one Afghan civilian was killed, up to a dozen hurt, including some by an errant U.S. missile dropped in response. The attack was still ongoing when Mattis spoke alongside the Afghan president.
An attack on an international airport anywhere in the world is a criminal act by terrorists. It's designed to go after generally innocent people to make some sort of statement, and this is a classic definition of what the Taliban are up to right now.
A senior U.S. official told reporters weapons given to the Taliban by Russia and Iran have probably been used in the past to attack U.S. and coalition forces. This is Secretary Mattis's first trip to Afghanistan since President Trump recently announced a new strategy for the 16-year-old war, which includes sending more than 3,000 additional U.S. troops to join the nearly 11,000 on the ground. The Taliban and ISIS are claiming credit for today's attack and said Mattis was their target. Today marks the anniversary of when the Taliban took Kabul in 1996. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Ukraine's prime minister says a huge fire at an ammunitions depot may have been sabotaged. The blaze set off a series of explosions and prompted the evacuation of thousands of people. No casualties were reported there. Ukraine government forces have been fighting Russia-backed separatists since 2014. Trash talk in Texas. Houston wants help from Dallas with all the debris from Hurricane Harvey. We'll bring you that story next.
Honda knows even crosstown trips can test the limits of any utility vehicle. You've got to be prepared to smoothly handle the unexpected. With smartly designed interiors to keep both you and your cargo comfortable. The Honda Pilot, with room for up to 8 people, or whatever else you're bringing. Nothing compares to a Honda. KBB.com's Best Buy for 2017.
And now I help people find discounts like paperless, multi-car, and safe driver that help them save on their car insurance. Any questions? Yeah?
How do you go to the bathroom?
Great. Any insurance-related questions? Mm-hmm.
Do you have a girlfriend?
I'm actually focusing on my career right now, saving people nearly $600 when they switch. So...
Where's your belly button?
I've got to start booking better gigs.
It's time to get smart about home security. Introducing Floodlight Cam by Ring, a motion-activated security light with an HD camera.
Don't even think about it.
That lets you know when anyone steps on your property. Illuminate every corner of your home with a ring of security. Smart enough to detect people and objects.
Hey girls.
Hi Dad.
With Floodlight Cam, you can stop crime before it happens. Protecting your home has never been easier. Now that's security in a whole new light. Available at ring.com.
I'm Andy, and I lost 30 pounds on Nutrisystem.
Listen up, guys. Want to shed a few pounds? Got a beer belly? Then you need Nutrisystem for men.
I lost 43 pounds on Nutrisystem.
Lose 15 pounds in your first month and 7 inches overall. Lose weight fast, money back guarantee. Put down the pie and go to drop15now.com and get new NutriCrush bars to crush cravings free and turbo shakes to bust that gut free.
You eat the food, you lose the weight.
Visit drop15now.com and get Nutrisystem for men with bars and shakes free.
2 Hannity exclusives. Tonight, Paul Ryan talks tax reform in a powerful sit-down. Thursday, a can't-miss interview with Rush Limbaugh, only on Hannity.
Today, we're finally getting our bathtub redone. We weren't happy with it.
But we didn't want the headaches of demolition.
Or the days without our bathroom. Then a friend told us about Bath Fitter and their unique tub-over-tub process. There's no demolition, and they install in as little as a day. They also have a seamless wall for a watertight fit. And Bath Fitter has a lifetime guarantee. What a difference. finally a bathtub I love.
Call today or learn more at bathfitter.com.
A good enough dinner
Hey, should I heat up some nuggets for us?
isn't good or enough.
It's a plated night.
Yes!
So plan for great. Start at plated.com. Pick from a wide variety of dinner options. All the shopping and measuring is done for you. So get together, share, enjoy. Go to plated.com right now to get 50% off your first week of Plated Nights. That's up to a $79 value. This offer won't last, so go to plated.com now.
There appears to be an effort in some corners to try to portray the damage from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico as President Trump's Hurricane Katrina. But the administration insists it is on top of the situation and doing everything it can. Correspondent Garrett Tenney is on the ground tonight in San Juan.
Across Puerto Rico, there is a can-do spirit in communities which have largely been cut off from the outside world.
I've been surprised by the generosity of people, even though they're in a bad situation here.
But with the isolation also comes rising frustrations. The nascent relief effort is struggling to reach most rural and coastal villages.
Red Cross came the day before yesterday, said we were going to come and bring ice and water and food. Nowhere.
Almost the entire island remains without electricity, and officials admit full power may not be restored for months. First responders are warning of a more immediate concern. Only about 40% of customers have potable water. Supplies are reaching the island. These Seabees and Marines coming ashore with manpower and equipment. Federal officials say they have already provided more than 4 million meals and 6 million liters of water to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands since the storm. Some of the 3.4 million residents feel forgotten by the mainland government and put the blame squarely on President Trump.
He has the power. If he could show his power in Puerto Rico, things would be different, very different. Many people don't trust him.
The Commonwealth's governor, though, is praising the Trump administration's relief efforts so far and tells Fox News there is an urgent need for truck drivers to transport the incoming aid to those who need it.
It's a logistics support. It really is that basic. If you fly over, as we did over the ports, you see that we have thousands of crates of food, water, fuel is plentiful, but we need the transportation wherewithal to execute.
Talking with residents and officials, there is an uneasy awareness of how difficult the rebuilding task will be. But the more immediate, mundane task across Puerto Rico, people collecting water from wells and streams, clearing roads, repairing homes and broken bones, while navigating day-long waits for food and fuel.
Truly, this is the first water tank that I have seen here in this area. It is the first. That is why you are seeing such a crazy mess of people.
Nearly every night for the last 35 years, the bright neon lights of this iconic restaurant, Campo Mar, have served up good food, live music, and lots of family memories. It's a stark contrast from the scene both here and across the island tonight, but the owner tells me, despite the long road ahead, he hopes to see both these lights and those across the island back on soon. Brett?
Garrett Tenney live in Levittown, Puerto Rico. Garrett, thank you. Dallas and Houston are talking trash, and it has nothing to do with sports. Houston is asking for and getting some major help in dealing with all the debris from Hurricane Harvey. 125 football stadiums worth of garbage. Correspondent Casey Stiegel reports from Dallas.
Many neighborhoods across southeast Texas look more like demolition sites in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. Trash trucks and heavy equipment have taken over the same streets where kids once rode their bikes and people walked their dogs.
We can't get it out there.
Mike Evans had 4 feet of water inside his East Houston home, and nearly all of his belongings were ruined. So he did what thousands of his fellow neighbors have been forced to do: drag every memory, photo, and keepsake that could not be salvaged to the curb.
But they'll only pick up 10 feet, and that's it. Then the homeowner's responsible for getting it pushed out there. How do you do that?
Local officials say Harvey left behind enough storm damage to fill 125 football stadiums, a task so large there are not enough workers or pieces of equipment to haul everything away in a timely manner. Subcontractors are attempting to fill the void, but most spend all day on just one street.
People are flagging us down, referrals. I just did this gentleman right here.
The neighbor came out and said, hey, come move my trash. I went down there, the same spot. The neighbor came out, hey, come move my trash. You know, so we're just getting neighbor after neighbor.
Nearly everything will eventually end up in one of the city's landfills, where officials stress there's still plenty of room, while victims say they're just trying to figure out what comes next.
I've looked into staying at the Ritz-Carlton for 6 months, but that's not going to happen either.
The city of Dallas will soon send extra garbage trucks and workers down to the disaster zone to help out. Austin and San Antonio have already deployed extra resources. Brett?
Casey Stiegel in Dallas. Casey, thanks. The Dow broke a 4-day losing streak today, finishing ahead 56. The S&P 500 was up 10. The Nasdaq gained 73 today. Up next, your first glimpse at what the president's southern border wall might look like. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WDRB in Louisville, as Hall of Fame basketball coach Rick Pitino is placed on leave by the University of Louisville. Pitino's lawyer says the coach has effectively been fired. It comes one day after the FBI's announcement of a major bribery scandal that is rocking the sport. Louisville was not mentioned directly in court papers, but they contained enough information to identify the school as one of those suspected. Fox 7 in Austin, as police in Texas prepare to enforce the new anti-sanctuary city law. A federal judge is allowing the state to move forward with the measure, which requires law enforcement to honor federal immigration requests to detain people in local jails for possible deportation. Austin's interim police chief has opposed that law, but says his department is now reviewing its policies. And this is a live look at Los Angeles from our affiliate, Fox 11. One of the big stories there tonight, all evacuation orders have been lifted as firefighters gain control of a large and powerful wildfire that burned one home and threatened nearly 2,000 others in the southern California canyons. Residents are returning to neighborhoods in Corona, southeast of Los Angeles. Crews with support from a fleet of aircraft continue to douse hot spots in that fire. It's charred 3 square miles of brush. 20% contained tonight. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. President Trump said today the NFL must change its ways regarding player protests, or business will, in his words, go to hell. Most of the people in our latest Fox News poll tend to come down on that side of the issue, though views have shifted since last year. 55% say kneeling in protest during the national anthem is inappropriate. 41% disagree. California Secretary of State says information he received about Russian hacking of state election systems was a year late and wrong. Democrat Alex Padilla says he was initially told by Homeland Security Department that Russians scanned websites associated with his office. He says that was not true. Padilla says the public deserves what he calls timely and accurate information. We have asked Homeland Security for a response to him. We're getting a first look tonight at some of the designs being considered for President Trump's southern border wall. Construction is now underway. Senior correspondent Adam Housley is on the U.S.-Mexico border.
It may look like any other construction site, but this is the beginning of President Trump's long-promised new border wall, one he began to tout from day one of his campaign a little more than 2 years ago.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words.
The process now involves 8 different wall designs being constructed outside of San Diego by 6 different companies. Congress has already coughed up the money for the prototypes, but will need to approve billions more in order to use one or more of these designs to complete the wall, stretching from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
History shows that border security is an achievable objective when we have the right kind of policies and resources in the form of law enforcement personnel, technology, and border infrastructure.
Roughly 650 miles of fence or barriers of various types already exist along the border, with about 1,300 miles still needed. Average construction cost so far has been more than $3 million a mile. But the project is not without controversy. The feds and local police departments are planning for protests, though none have materialized so far. And just last week, the state of California filed suit joining immigration rights groups and environmental activists in their opposition to the Trump wall.
Although we're an environmental organization, we do see commonality with other organizations fighting other elements of the Trump administration's approach to immigration issues and border security issues.
After 30 days, the evaluation process begins here, just feet away from a degraded fence that agents say is clearly ineffective and old. And while the construction process has already begun, we're told some companies may not show up here for a couple of weeks in order to keep their designs secret from their competitors. Brett?
Adam Housley along the southern border. Adam, thank you. State Department officials tell Fox News Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is still considering what to do about the apparent sonic attacks on workers at the American Embassy in Havana. Cuba continues to deny involvement. All of this comes as some of the president's supporters are wondering whatever happened to his promise to end the Obama-era deals with the communist nation. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen looks for answers tonight.
Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
Yet more than 100 days have passed since President Trump thrilled little Havana with his vow to restore the sanctions and embargo on Cuba.
You watch what's going to happen.
And nothing has happened. That's because the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, the small overburdened unit that manages sanctions, has not produced the fine print for Mr. Trump's policy shift to be enacted. The announced changes do not take effect until OFAC issues new regulations. OFAC cautioned on July 25th, adding OFAC expects to issue its regulatory amendments in the coming months. Contacted by Fox News this week, a Treasury spokesman told us, "We don't have a specific date yet for when those revised regulations will be publicly released. We still anticipate," Deputy Assistant Secretary Seth Unger said, "it will be in the coming months."
Yeah, it has not taken effect. That's correct.
Sita Ramachandran, a New York lawyer who specializes in sanctions enforcement law, notes that OFAC's limited resources are no match for a sharp increase in sanctions activity.
New U.S. sanctions bill against Russia, North Korea, and Iran.
President Trump is imposing new financial sanctions against Venezuela.
For Venezuela, President Trump issued an executive order. But in rolling back Cuba policy, Mr. Trump gave a speech.
We will enforce the ban on tourism.
And issued this national security memorandum to cabinet officers and executive branch agencies, which instructed Treasury and other departments to begin drafting new regulations within 30 days. That happened, but since then, little else has.
Trump could have actually issued an executive order that immediately changed the sanctions program. For example, a couple weeks ago, there was an executive order on Venezuelan sanctions that did not require any implementing regulations by OFAC, but that's not what happened here.
Minutes ago, a White House spokesman told me President Trump's Cuba memorandum was crafted to mirror the documents that President Obama had issued, loosening the policy that federal officials always expected a 6 to 9 month process, and that while the changes are not yet law to the outside world, the memorandum carried the force of law, quote, within the executive branch. Brett.
You can read a detailed write-up of this story on foxnews.com. James, thanks.
You bet.
The U.S. and Russia have agreed to cooperate on the construction of a base orbiting the moon. It's called the Deep Space Gateway. It's intended to be something of a pit stop for missions to explore the moon, Mars, and other planets. Reports are saying that NASA and the Russian Space Agency hope to begin construction in the early 2020s. The president pushes tax reform and pivots on the Alabama Senate race. We'll get reaction from the panel when we come back.
Tax reform will protect low-income and middle-income households, not the wealthy and well-connected. They can call me all they want. It's not going to help.
For all of us, this is a now or never moment.
But I hope that there will be some Democrats who are willing to work with us.
This is welfare, helping those of great wealth with more tax breaks.
If I could say it as simple as possible, I would say that this tax reform conversation is about hashtag keep your money.
I got some chuckles there. Senator Scott talking about this rollout. We'll go through some of the details as they stand now. Remember, this is the beginning of the process. A lot of the details are worked out on Capitol Hill during the process, and they have to pass a budget first. But as it stands tonight, individual creates 3 brackets, 12%, 25%, and 35%. There could be a 4th, depending on what Capitol Hill does. Doubles the standard deduction to $12,000 for single person, $24,000 for a married couple. Replaces the personal exemption for dependents with an expanded non-refundable portion for the child tax credit, something higher. They don't have a number yet. Eliminates most itemized deductions, keeps those for mortgage, interest, and charitable contributions. Repeals the alternative minimum tax, eliminates the estate tax and generation skipping taxes, eliminates state and local tax deduction. On the corporate side, you go from 35% to 20%, eliminates the corporate alternative minimum tax, maximum small business rate of 25%, that's taxed at the individual level for some of those businesses, partial limitation on interest deduction for C corporations, allows full expensing for short-lived capital investments such as equipment and machinery for at least 5 years. Keeps research and development tax credit along with low-income housing credit, eliminates Section 199 manufacturing deduction. Finally, on international, moves to a territorial tax system which doesn't tax business profits made outside the country. As a transition, one-time tax on previously accumulated profits earned overseas, that's the repatriation of money, and calls for a lower tax rate on liquid foreign assets and a higher tax rate on cash profits. Okay, take a breath. But at least you have the details as they stand now. Let's bring in our panel. Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and publisher. They seem optimistic, Tom.
They do, and after the follies of healthcare, this was actually, by the current standards, a pretty smooth rollout. Everybody was unified around the same message. There's obviously some squabbling to be done among Republicans, but by and large, they seem unified, and the pressure is on now. I think all the Republicans are feeling the pressure because of the failures. They want to get this done. They want to get it passed by the end of the year so they can have something to point to, a major accomplishment under this administration.
He went to Indiana, Susan, and he had Joe Donnelly, the Democrat, up for re-election in 2018. There were actually 10 Senate Democrats up for re-election in states that Donald Trump won. And obviously, I think we'll probably see him visit maybe all 10 of those states.
And you know, there are some things that are appealing about the tax bill for Democrats that wasn't the case with health care reform, because lowering the corporate tax rate to 20%, everybody agrees that that'd be a good idea for the U.S. economy. Simplifying the number of brackets, I think that's an appealing thing. So maybe you have the possibility of getting some Democratic support. And you know from the experience with health care that gives you a cushion that you probably need, even if you manage to do a kind of maneuver where you can avoid a Democratic filibuster. But the problem with the rollout they had today was that there are so many unanswered questions. There are so many unanswered questions about how you pay to offset at least some of the cost of the tax cuts. The other problem is, as we know with tax reform, the devil is really in the details. And you look at every single proposal made, including, for instance, ending the deductibility of state and local taxes. That's going to be a huge battle that will affect not only Democrats but Republicans who represent high tax states.
Because how to figure out how this balances out, becomes revenue neutral, is really the shell game that is Capitol Hill. I mean, they're talking about dynamic scoring that essentially estimates what all of the money in people's pockets means for businesses that they're going to spend the money at.
Right, so there's a number of moving parts here, but overall I agree that the rollout today was strong. I thought the speech from the president was good, and what struck me as I watched it was detailed and specific and defending proactively a policy. We never saw that from him on health care. We saw it on day one on tax reform. I think that that's telling. In terms of some of these details, I mean, there are big questions. How large will the child tax credits be, for example? How would they try to limit abuses of these pass-through corporations having a lower rate than individuals, and people might try to game that system? We have to wait and see what Congress comes up with. But I was sitting at this desk this morning with Maria Bartiromo, who is in town on Fox Business Network. Sitting next to me was Ted Cruz, and he said something that's a bit sobering from a Republican perspective. He said, we're all excited, we're all very hopeful, but this is not a done deal, and these negotiations could take many months.
Tom?
Well, and Mark Short, just when you asked him about the plan, he did not say that it was going to be deficit neutral. I mean, he really deflected on that, and so I think that may be where this is headed. The Republicans are like, look, we need growth. That's the object here, and we'll deal with deficits later.
Right. They all become Art Laffer up there on supply side. And long gone are the debt clocks behind anybody talking on the campaign trail. Yeah.
You know, one of the things I think will be a test here is President Trump continues to say this is going to help middle-class people, not rich people. And I think that there will be a big debate when we know all the details about who actually gets the lion's share of the help with this tax bill, and whether if he does fashion a tax bill that gives most of its benefits to the middle class, which means that maybe you add that fourth bracket to hit a higher bracket to hit people at the top of the income scale. Will Republicans agree to that? Would Republicans agree to a plan that in effect raised taxes on the wealthy?
Yeah. I think you'd have to look at that. I mean, if they get rid of the estate tax and the corporate tax goes down to 20%, there probably are a lot of Republicans who would sign on to that. I want to play this soundbite about Tom Price. And he, not to rhyme here, is on thin ice.
Tom Price spent a lot of money on that charter plane. Is that cool?
I was looking into it, and I will look into it. And I will tell you personally, I'm not happy about it. I am not happy about it.
What are you going to do about it, Mr. President?
I'm going to look at it. I am not happy about it, and I let him know it. Hopefully, he's going to get the votes tomorrow to start our path toward killing this horrible thing known as Obamacare. He better get him. Oh, he better. Otherwise, I'll say, Tom, you're fired. I'll get somebody.
That's then and now. He's not happy about the planes and said, we'll see. The last time he said we'll see was when Steve Bannon was still in the White House.
He likes we'll see. That's a go-to for him. Yeah. But I do think that Price might be on some shaky ground here, because you look at the multiple failures on the health care front. The Republicans didn't have a unified plan that they could all rally behind right out of the gate, which is what many Republican voters hoped and sort of assumed that they would have. And now you add in this terribly unforced error by Price, spending lavishly on private jets, including a flight where he drove to Dulles, 45 minutes from here, to fly 20 minutes to Philadelphia at a cost of $25,000 or something. You know, this is supposed to be the party of fiscal discipline, and the new details coming out from Politico, it looks terrible. And I think the populist instincts of Donald Trump he knows that it looks bad, which is why he said what he said.
Think he hangs in there?
Look, the last thing that Trump wants right now, I think, though, is to go through the firing of a cabinet person and going through the process again. It'll deflect from this push on taxes. He may hang in there until the end of the year, until this thing gets done, and then maybe he gets let go.
And the question is whether health care does get done, and that's a whole nother topic. But next up, we want to talk about Afghanistan, the Taliban going after America's defense secretary there. Stay here.